Hey, everybody. So, last week I asked you a question, challenged you really with a question. How far will you follow Jesus? I said that the Bible makes it clear that being a real follower of Jesus can involve hardship, sacrifice, and discomfort, and even persecution. And that is not a popular message. That is not a happy message. So thank you for all coming back this week. I'm so glad I didn't run you off. But the reality is that sometimes Jesus is going to intentionally call us into difficulty, into hardship. Sorry to do this, but could you turn me down just a little bit? I feel like I'm screaming at people. Is that okay? All right, good, because I'm going to get loud today. No. So the reality is that Jesus is going to call us into tough stuff. He's just going to, and we have to be prepared for that. The fact is that discipleship, true, biblical, honest discipleship, isn't for the faint of heart. Christianity is not for wimps. It's just not. We have to be a little bit stronger and tougher. You know, anybody can go to church gatherings and anybody can call themselves a Christian, but to actually be a follower of Jesus takes a degree of risk. And if we're going to follow Jesus as far as he will lead him, we just sang that song. You know, that whole song is about, and thank you, Dave, we had no idea. God knows what he's doing. Thank you. That whole song is about, take me further than I'm comfortable with, right? And so we're begging God to strengthen our faith and make us able to see him in those moments. And it's just going to be dangerous. Today we're going to look at what happens when you find yourself in one of those situations. If we're going to be those people who follow Jesus out into the water, out into the crowd, out into the dangerous areas, we're going to have to develop some courageous faith. And Paul absolutely exemplified that. He finally arrives in Jerusalem. He's been traveling all over, and he is confronted, and at the end of his missionary journeys, and he just personifies courageous faith. We're going to look at that today. We got a lot to cover today, so grab your Bible, turn to Acts chapter 21. We're going to start in verse 17. Just let me give you a little context here. Paul and his companions, he's got a sort of little entourage going with him, somebody from every one of the areas that he was just spending many years ministering to. And they've made it from Macedonia down to Greece, over to Asia Minor, and finally they've made it over to Judea. And the whole time, the whole journey, there have been prediction after prediction, warning after warning that Paul is getting ready to face hardship, like bad hardship. In fact, Agabus, the prophet, came down and he dramatically demonstrates this by taking Paul's belt off of him and tying his own hands with it and says, this is what the Jews are going to do to you. And yet Paul is determined to go to Jerusalem. I mentioned last week he's determined because he believes, and I agree with him, that the Spirit was leading him to Jerusalem. And that's where we're going to pick it up in verse 17. It says, when we arrived at Jerusalem, the brothers received us warmly. And the next day, Paul and the rest of us went to see James, and all the elders were present. And Paul greeted them and reported in detail that what God had done among the Gentiles through his ministry. And when they heard this, they praised God. Then they said to Paul, you see, brother, how many thousands of Jews have believed, and all of them are zealous for the law. They have been informed that you teach all the Jews who live among the Gentiles to turn away from Moses, telling them not to circumcise their children or to live according to our customs. What shall we do? They will certainly hear that you have come, and so do what we tell you. There are 4 men who have made a vow, and take these men and join in their purification rites and pay their expenses so that they can have their heads shaved. Then everybody will know that there's no truth to these reports about you, and that you yourself are living in obedience to the law. For the Gentiles, as for the Gentile believers, we've already written to them of our decision that they should abstain from food sacrificed to idols, and from blood, and from meat of strangled animals, and from sexual immorality. And the next day, Paul took the men and purified himself along with them, and then he went to the temple to give notice of the date and the day of purification would end, and the offering would be made for each of them. So when Paul gets to Jerusalem, everything seems to go great. I mean, he meets with the de facto leader of the church there, James. This is James, the brother of Jesus. And Peter and James kind of ran the show, and James sort of taken the lead at this point. But it's not just James, it's the elders all around. And they're all excited. about what's getting ready to happen. They're thrilled about what they hear about the Gentiles. But then they take this hard left turn, and they start to, well, they're worried. They start to express to Paul that there's rumors spreading about him. See, there's these thousands and thousands of Jews who have come to Christ. They believe the gospel, and yet they're still devoted to the law. They're still devout to the law, and they're worried because this is Pentecost, right? So there's Jews from all over the place coming in, and they're spreading rumors all about what Paul was doing when he was in Macedonia and Greece and Asia Minor, and they're worried. And so they show this. They ask Paul to do this show of solidarity. They say, go pay for the purification rites, do the purification rites, make a demonstration, everybody, that you really are adhering to the law. And I can't help but think that this was a mistake. To me, this doesn't make any sense. What I think we see here is a lack of courage from the elders. See, they wanted Paul to prove that he was devout to the law to a bunch of immature believers who should have known better. And they were wrong. I mean, they were just wrong. The Jews weren't under the law anymore. And the elders knew that. In fact, James was one of the guys who had agreed with everybody else that they didn't need to hold to the kosher law, the dietary restrictions. He was one of the guys who agreed that circumcision wasn't required anymore. And so there was an opportunity here for them as elders to step up as leaders and take these immature believers and say, listen, let me help you understand what's happening here. Jesus has fulfilled the law. You are now free to live, operating free from the law. But instead, they say, no, I'm worried of what's going to happen. And so they decide that they're going to pressure Paul to do this, and Paul does what he's supposed to do. He submits to the elders, but it doesn't actually help. It doesn't spare him from anything. He can't really prove how Jewish he is. Not enough, anyway. Look at verse 27. It says that when the 7 days were nearly over, the Jews from the province of Asia saw Paul at the temple. Now, I got to be clear, these are not the Jewish Christians we were just talking about. These are most likely Jews who were in and around Asia Minor, Macedonia, Greece, that knew of Paul because he had spent years there ministering and leading people. So they didn't really understand. They were just, they thought they knew who Paul was, and they thought they knew what his message was. Keep going in 27. It says, they stirred up the whole crowd and seized him, shouting, "Men of Israel, help us. This is the man who teaches all men everywhere against our people and our law and this place, the temple. And besides, he has brought Greeks into the temple area and defiled this holy place." They had previously seen Trophimus the Ephesian in the city with Paul, and they assumed that Paul had brought him into the temple area. So what they're accusing Paul of is a big deal. It's a huge, huge deal. There's a picture I want to show. There it is. That big area around the temple is what's known as the court of the Gentiles. That's where Gentile men were allowed to go. And then the smaller area inside is the temple proper. The front area would be the court of the women. The back area would be the court of the men and the priests. And then inside that tall section would be the Holy of Holies, where the priest would go once a year. Gentiles were only allowed in that outside area. And they found ancient carved signs that would be on the entrance from the court of Gentiles into the temple proper that says this: "Any Gentile who is caught trespassing beyond this point will have himself to blame for his death, which will soon follow." That's pretty bold, right? Come to God, not you. Yeah? So to the Jews, the sanctity of the temple was paramount. And the crowd quickly became a mob. Look at verse 30. It says the whole city was aroused, and the people came running from all directions. Seizing Paul, they dragged him from the temple. My guess is they dragged him from the temple proper out into the court of the Gentiles. I lost my place. Dragged him from the temple, and immediately the gate was shut. And while they were trying to kill him, news reached the commander of the Roman troops that the whole city of Jerusalem was in an uproar. And he at once took some officers and soldiers and ran down into the crowd. And when the soldiers saw when the rioters saw the commander and his soldiers, they stopped beating Paul. And the commander came up and arrested Paul and ordered him to be bound with 2 chains. That may be what Agabus meant with the hands and the feet. He says, and then he asked him who he was and what he had done. And some in the crowd shouted one thing, and some another. And since the commander could not get to the truth because of the uproar, he ordered that Paul be taken into the barracks. And when Paul reached the steps, the violence of the mob was so great that he had to be carried by the soldiers. And the crowd that followed kept shouting, "Away with him." So this is very reminiscent of the riot in Ephesus. Remember, a couple weeks ago we talked about this? So the city is in chaos. There is a crowd coming from all over the place. They're rushing in, and they really, most of them don't even know exactly why they're there. There's a whole lot of confusion about what Paul has done or who he is or any of those things. I mean, at first we knew they were trying to, they were making accusations against him. They were trying to kill him. Maybe they just hated him because of his message of the gospel. Maybe they just didn't understand who he was. But by the time the crowd gets there, it's just a mob. And they don't really know what's going on, but they know for one thing, for sure, they want to see Paul killed. They want him dead. But see, they're at the edge of the Temple Mount. Up in that top right corner, there's a thing called the Antonia Fortress. That was the barracks of the soldiers. And so the Roman soldiers find out very, very quickly, and they rush down in, and they rescue Paul, but you'll find out very soon that being rescued by Rome, that's not necessarily a good thing. I mean, they arrested Paul, the one being beaten. That should tell you everything you need to know about Romans. First, though, let's look at the courage of Paul and his courageous faith. Start in verse 37. It says, as the soldiers were about to take Paul into the barracks, he asked the commander, "May I say something to you?" "Do you speak Greek?" he replied. "Aren't you the Egyptian who started the revolution, the revolt, and led 4,000 terrorists out into the desert some time ago?" And Paul answered, "I'm a Jew from Tarsus in Cilicia, a citizen of no ordinary city. Please let me speak to the people." So up to this point, we haven't really seen Paul's courageous faith on display, although you could argue that his going into the temple at all was courageous, or even being in Jerusalem at all was courageous, because especially with what Agabus had said and what the Holy Spirit had warned him was going to happen. But now the chaos has erupted. Now it's rubber meets the road time. And the Jews are actively trying to kill him. He has been beaten. He knows that his life is on the line. And he has been saved by this Roman commander. And so it would be perfectly reasonable for Paul. In fact, I think most of us would agree, go with the cops, right? Get out of the problem. It would be perfectly reasonable for Paul to just let them take him inside of the barracks where the mob couldn't get to him and he would be safe. But instead, he asks for a chance to speak. But what's interesting, he doesn't ask for a chance to speak to defend himself. He doesn't start to explain, no, I never brought Trophimus into the place. No, you guys don't even know why you're here. He wasn't trying to make a defense of himself. He wanted to speak to the people because he wanted the chance to talk to his fellow Jews about their Messiah. So look at verse 40. It says, having received the commander's permission, Paul stood on the steps and motioned to the crowd. And when they all went silent, he said to them in Aramaic, "Brothers and fathers, listen now to my defense." And the word there, this is just fun little trivia for those of you who care, is apologia or apologia. It's where we get the word apology. I don't know if you know this, but an apology is actually an explanation. Make sense? So that's just fun, useless Bible trivia. There you go. So verse 2, it says, when they heard him speak to them in Aramaic, they became quiet. Now Paul goes on to explain a story that we've read before in Acts. We read it last year. It's the story of who he was as a Jew. And he explains to them that I was raised in this city, and I was trained under the venerated, revered Gamaliel, and I actually persecuted Christians. And in fact, I went to the high priest, and I got permission to go to Damascus and persecute them there and bring them back here. And he goes on to talk about on that road, he has an encounter with Jesus, and how the light blinded him, but he could still hear the voice, and how he goes to Damascus, and Ananias heals his eyes, and he's baptized. Then he skips forward, and he tells them about how when he returned to Jerusalem, God appeared to him a second time and told him he needed to leave because they weren't going to listen to his message. But Paul actually argued with God. This is reading between the lines a little bit, but he tells God, but no, I've done all these things. I'm one of them. I'm a Jew who persecuted Christians, and now I'm a Christian. I've got a lot of cred. Let me talk. But look at verse 21. Not 21, sorry. Look at verse, I don't know, where am I? Yeah, verse 21. So then the Lord said to me, go, I will send you far away to the Gentiles. The crowd listened to Paul until he said this, and then they raised their voice and shouted, rid the earth of him, he is not fit to live. What went wrong? Gentiles. He said the magic word, right? Don't miss how much the Jews hated the Gentiles. They were willing to listen to the whole story. They didn't even freak out when he said Jesus, but as soon as he said Gentiles, kill him! Right? Let's keep going. It says, as they were shouting and throwing off their cloaks and flinging dust in the air, the commander ordered Paul to be taken into the barracks. And he directed, this is again Roman safety, Pax Romana here, he directed that he be flogged and questioned in order to find out why the people were shouting at him like this. And as they stretched him out to flog him, Paul said to the centurion standing there, is it legal for you to flog a Roman citizen who hasn't even been found guilty? When the centurion heard this, he went to the commander and reported it. What are you going to do? He asked. This man is a Roman citizen. And the commander went to Paul and asked, tell me, are you a Roman citizen? Yes, I am, he answered. And the commander said, I had to pay a high price for my citizenship. I was born a citizen, Paul replied. Those who were about to question him withdrew immediately, and the commander himself was alarmed when he realized that he had put Paul, a Roman citizen, in chains. So again, you see Paul demonstrating his courageous faith. Someone said once that Paul consistently overestimated his ability to calm down a crowd. I don't necessarily think that's what's going on here. I think what's actually going on is that Paul knew that no matter what he said to the crowd, they were going to hate him. That they were going to want him dead. His life was in danger. But I think that he hoped that someone would hear him. I think that he was bold for the sake of the few who were scattered among the mob who might hear a little bit about Jesus and want to know more. And then we see him standing up to the Romans. See, Paul's right that it's against the law for them to flog him. In fact, they'd already broken the law by putting him in chains. There were 3 laws that every citizen was allowed. And the first one was you can't bind a Roman citizen, chain them. Second was you can't flog them. And the third is they can appeal to Caesar. We'll get to that in a couple chapters. But the reality is that they knew that they were doing something wrong, but they were also indoors. I mean, they totally could have just killed him. I mean, who would know, right? And again, he stands up to the commander, a man named Claudius Lysias. He became a Roman citizen by buying it. We know he did that because he bought it under the Emperor Claudius. And he would have had the rights of a citizen, but he would have been seen sort of as a second-class citizen. All of the natural-born citizens would have looked down on him. And so when he challenged Paul with the idea that this poor Jew, there's no way he could possibly have bought his citizenship, and Paul comes back with, well, I am a born citizen of Rome. That's a bold move. That could have gone very, very badly because Claudius Lysias had all of the power in that moment. But Paul didn't fear what men could do to him because he knew who he served. He knew who was on his side. You know, if you've been through this study with us in Acts this year or last year, you know this isn't the first time that Paul's faced persecution, right? I mean, that's a pretty common story. In fact, I've struggled with how much we really need to look at these last few chapters of Acts because honestly, how many sermons can I preach about facing persecution? But the more I think about it, I think that maybe the American church should think more about persecution than we do. If you read Acts and consider how much of the story of the origin of the church is dedicated to the fact that the church faced hardship and the church faced persecution, it begs the question, what does it really even look like to be the church? I mean, if the early church faced persecution all the time, shouldn't we? And if you don't think that the modern church is being persecuted around the world, I would encourage you to go and read up on what's going on in Nigeria and the Republic of Congo and Sudan, Iran and China and Nicaragua and Cuba and Somalia and Yemen. And if you don't think that that can happen here, I would encourage you to go read the things that were said online after Charlie Kirk was murdered. And more than that, I would encourage you to read Jesus' promises in Matthew chapter 5 and 20, and in Luke 6, and in John 15, and in Revelation 2, that if you are going to be a follower of Jesus, you are promised by Jesus that you are going to be hated and attacked. In 1 Peter 4, it says, "Dear friends, do not be surprised at the painful trial you are suffering, as though something strange were happening to you. But rejoice that you participate in the sufferings of Christ, so that you may be overjoyed when his glory is revealed. If you are insulted because of the name of Christ, you are blessed, for the Spirit of glory and of God rests on you." If we are going to follow Jesus as far as he will lead us, then persecution is coming. And listen, it may not come in your lifetime, but it likely will come in the lifetime of your children or your grandchildren. And so we who are followers of Christ need to prepare ourselves and those who come after us to be able to persevere in the face of it. We don't do ourselves any favor by pretending like it's not coming. We don't do our children or our grandchildren any favors. And to do that, we have to develop some courageous faith. What does it mean to be courageous? Well, courage isn't a lack of fear. Courage is the will to do the right thing even when you're faced with opposition. Even when the possibility that things could go badly is looming. Even when you know that it will go badly. That's what courage is. Courage is the ability to stand on the truth, especially when the crowd hates it. When you know that they could do their worst. Courage is the ability to speak up when people don't want you to. Especially when it costs you everything. Here's the thing. If we're going to have courage, to be courageous, we have to have confidence in God. Okay, so our courage isn't built on what we can do. It isn't built on what we are able to accomplish or the confidence that our words are valid and we can back them up. Our courage is built on the confidence of who God is, right? That he is in control, that God will prevail, that he is for us, that his authority is absolute, that nothing that anybody can do to us is going to change our ultimate destiny. Our courage comes from confidence in him. And to have confidence in him, we have to really know him. Know him as he really is, not our hodgepodge idea of him, not the idea we had of him when we were 8, not the popular idea of him, not the sort of sanitized caricature of him that most people carry around, but as he really is, the fully formed, three-dimensional, high-definition, surround sound reality of who God is. That's the God that we need to know. He's the God of justice and mercy. He's the God of wrath and love. He's the God who is almighty, omnipotent, and omnipresent, and immutable, but he's also our Abba Father. He's the God who demands holiness, but also offers grace. To have confidence in him, we have to know him as he truly is. And to know him, you have to read and study his word. Cover to cover, top to bottom, inside out, we need to understand this word. We need to dig into it. We need to know the breadth and the details. We need to know the stories and the instructions. We need to understand the plain text and the symbolism. See, God primarily reveals himself in Scripture. He will reveal himself in Revelation. He will reveal himself in prayer. But primarily, this is how we get to know him. If we spend time with this word, if we dig into it and read it regularly and hope and work to understand it, do a little work to get it and make it make sense, we carve out time for that, then we truly know who God is, and then we build confidence in him, and then we have courageous faith. If we want to be like Paul, able to stand up and say, here's the truth, and I want to tell you the truth. I know it's unpopular, and I know the world will hate me, but I want you to know it. If you're willing to speak to the few in the crowd who will listen, if you want to have the bold, courageous faith like Paul had, it starts right here. We have to develop courageous faith because at some point it will no longer be safe to be Christians. And to quote Mark Moore, he said, I don't remember Jesus asking us to be safe. He's asking us to be dangerous. Dangerous to who? To the forces of darkness. We are the church who is supposed to overcome the gates of hell. That's who we're supposed to be dangerous to. We are meant to be a threat to the enemy and his forces. And if we are going to follow Jesus to the gates of hell so that we can rescue those who are chained there and bring them into life with us to know Jesus and be saved by him, we are going to have to become courageous people. Let's pray. God, I have been beat down by life and by opposing ideas and by fear, honestly, my own fears. And for most of my life, I've been like the elders who worried about the rocking the boat and undermining somebody's faith. Worried about, if I say this the wrong way, somebody's gonna walk away from Jesus. If I don't do this the right way, someone's gonna walk away from Jesus. God, I need courage, not based on what I can do, but based on who you are. Because you are the God who is in charge of the outcomes. But you ask us to go boldly with you, to walk out onto the water and to meet you there. Because you are already out there waiting for us in the mission. You've prepared good works for us to do, and you are there waiting for us to get there so that we can partner together. God, you've got to give us the courage to step outside of our front door, across the street and talk to our neighbor, look across the table and talk to our family. Give us the courage to stand up for what's true, not with hate or vitriol, with compassion and love, with the message that Paul said, but I met Jesus. This is who I was, but I encountered the risen King. God, pour out your Spirit on us. Amen.